Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swail. Today, I'm joined by Senator Molly Cook, representing Texas's Senate District 15. Senator Cook is a sixth-generation Texan and a registered nurse with a long history of advocating for health and safety improvements to her native Houston and Texas as a whole. Senator Cook, how are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. Thanks for asking. Happy to be on.
I'm excited to have you on. I gave you a pretty brief intro there. If you want to add to it, tell me a little bit about your district. I think this is you're not necessarily a freshman. You came in a special election. Is that correct?
Technically, yes, but it was in May, so definitely freshman status.
Okay. Yeah. And I assume all of you're learning the ropes and everything's going well.
Yes, yeah, it's
Good.
been great. And this is my first elected gig ever in the Texas Senate, and have been practicing at the bedside as a nurse until this point and doing volunteer organizing. And it is drinking out of a fire hose, but we're having a blast.
So, Senate District 15, that's the Houston area. Does it cover all of Houston or is it no?
No, it is all located in Harris County, so only one county contained, which is a big difference from some of my West Texas colleagues.
Sure.
But it actually includes seven different, unincorporated Harris, Houston, Southside Place, some other of those small little enclaves. And then I also share a lot of Harris County with Forrest Miles, Carol Alvarado, Paul Betancourt, Joan Huffman, some other folks. So there's a bunch of us in there in the Houston area.
Yeah. So I want to talk. I mean, you have the Nurse First agenda, which you published, I think, a couple weeks ago, maybe a little bit more now. And before we there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. Before we get into that, obviously this is informed by your experience as a registered nurse. Can you sort of describe a little bit, like, why did you being a registered nurse, what sort of drove you to go from registered nurse to, Texas senator?
And people always ask that question and they're like, that's a strange jump. And it's so funny because to me, it feels very natural.
Sure.
And I'll tell you, the first time I ever wanted to be a nurse, I was in seventh grade. And
Okay.
I'll be honest, I hated math class. So I spent a lot of time during math class in the nurse's office. And the nurse was actually my pastor's wife in junior high. And one time I saw her respond when a kid, and this is a lot, but cracked his head open on the playground.
Sure.
And I remember her coming back in with this trash bag with like blood and clothes. And
Whoa.
I was lying there and I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I want to be able to do that and be able to respond to emergencies. So that really set me on a course to become an emergency room nurse. And I was so frustrated by what I saw, especially working nights in the ER. People aren't sick because they're making bad decisions or they're deficient in some way. They're sick because they're poor. They're sick because they can't afford a car. They're sick because the air is really filthy and they can't clean that up by themselves.
Sure.
And so for me, I just got very frustrated with how limited I was able to meet the needs of my patients and just wanted to go upstream and ended up in policy.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about several, I mean, that and more. I think it's a great segue, your story of, being seventh grade, being in the nurse's office, them, and you thinking to yourself, I want to be able to save people. And part of the Nurse First agenda is healthcare training, I think in public schools, CPR training in schools. I'm curious, I think that's great. I'm a father. I've gone through CPR training. I think it would be awesome if my son knew how to do CPR. Or my daughter or whatever. Um, what is this? I mean, I think that's cool. Why is this important, do you think? And is there something like, if this is successful, how much further can we go? Can we get kids doing sutures?
That's really funny. That's a scope of practice expansion discussion. No one wants to have that. No, so basically in Texas, 7th through 12th graders are already required to have CPR training, which we know is just hugely beneficial to public health. It saves lives. You literally see lifespans go up. But right now they can just kind of watch a video, which is understandable. Schools have a lot on their plate and they're dealing with, budget deficits and things like that. But we want to make sure that kids receive a hands-on portion to that. There just is nothing that compares to doing that kind of role play, putting your hands on a mannequin, feeling how hard you really do have to push so that when someone collapses, and you have that gut instinct, go grab the AED, start compressions. And I personally carry 4 patients with me at all times. They live with me that passed away in the emergency department in front of me, in front of their families. And if they'd had good bystander CPR, they could have walked out of the hospital. It happens.
Yeah.
So for me, this was just very personal to get to come to the legislature and be a nurse for my patients and kind of have that expertise of knowing what that looks like and how sad it is when we just lack public training, and that could have saved a life.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help but wonder. I mean, that's tragic. Those four instances that, you witnessed and those families witnessed. I would be, devastated if I was a family member witnessing that in front of me and thinking, man, I wish I could have done something more. If only I had been better at CPR or whatever. Is there, I mean, I think the Heimlich maneuver is the first thing that comes to mind of something that's common knowledge. Are there other things in your experience as a nurse that, if this is successful, that we could start implementing more like public training, whether it be in public schools or universities or whatever?
I think in general, there's a big gap in health literacy. I hear a lot of folks talk, especially about things like economic literacy. Do
Sure.
you know how to manage money? This to me is the exact same thing. Do you know how to manage your body? Do you know how to understand and navigate, at least on the surface level, the healthcare system? We know it's quite complicated,
Sure.
but do you know to hold pressure on a bleed? When there's some sort of mass casualty event, are you prepared to help the person beside you who's bleeding? Or are you prepared to administer Narcan or administer epinephrine and an overdose or an allergic reaction? And these are all things that bystanders can do, that can be empowered to save lives and start that emergency chain. And I think, yeah, the sky's the limit. We can always do more public health education and always do more harm reduction.
Yeah. I guess maybe as I don't know if I can call this a public service announcement. When I was doing CPR, the rhythm that you went to was staying alive. Is that still what they teach?
You can. There's a bunch of different songs. Whatever it is, it's between 100 and 120 beats a minute.
Okay. Well, staying alive, I guess the name of the song and everything, it was just a little bit more catchy. So, uh,
Right.
going deeper into the nurse first agenda and sort of helping with, I guess it's nurse first, but it's all, I mean, it's also, it's just patient first, and it's, Texan first, helping with health and, you know, helping people with things that they can't possibly control. Like you said, cleaner air, for instance. Um, I think that cleaner air would be awesome, but you're right. There's nothing that I can personally do outside of, I don't know, I could ride my bike more often, but I have three kids. That's a tough ask. What is how far does that go? What are some of your uh, items on the nurse first agenda that could help with stuff like that?
Yeah, and these are all things that I've seen in healthcare, especially in the emergency department. That's where I spend my time.
Yeah.
What causes emergencies, what prevents them, what helps people heal, what relieves suffering. And so our six pillars are access to healthcare, which I think is so important. I work in the Texas Medical Center, and if people in my community are having trouble accessing healthcare and people in rural communities are having trouble accessing healthcare, we've got an issue, right? We're not penetrating into the public and getting people the care that they need, because everyone in every type of district is struggling to do that. Safe homes and infrastructure, so basic. People need a safe place to lay their head, and they need a safe way to get around. A clean environment, clean air, water, and soil, like we've talked about. Access to opportunities, so workforce development, and public education. Neighborhood public schools are the most powerful tool that we have to access to affect somebody's access to opportunity. We included a pillar of belonging and connection, which is certainly a soft concept, but in every bill, we need to be thinking about, how does this help kids grow up in a way that they're connected to families and communities? How do we make sure our elders and seniors are not isolated? How do we make sure that folks really have a place and a home in our society? And I think we can use policy to bolster that. And then healthy and fair systems, which just seems really top of mind for the American public right now. Are we passing policies that benefit the wealthy who already have what they need? Or
Mhm.
are we putting public dollars to public use and stamping out corruption anywhere that we can? And so those are the six things that we think are kind of all encompassing, and
Yeah.
all of our policies fit in somewhere.
Well, let's talk about the housing part, because I pay pretty close attention to the housing issues. I know that the last session and this session, there's big pushes to change land use policy, this minimum lot sizes, all that stuff, and to make it more affordability. But it seems like your nurse first agenda is looking at it from sort of a different angle, And I'm wondering sort of what is the connection between housing and health, and then we can talk about some of your policy ideas.
And every bill to us is a health bill. That's
Okay.
just the lens that I use. We want a thriving economy, but we want a thriving economy to the end that people are healthy and well and that they're happy. And so a couple of the housing bills that we've looked at, this is basic stuff. I mean, you need housing like you need food and water, like you need
Sure.
medication,
I think it's one of the there it's at the bottom of that pyramid. The
Right, exactly. Yeah,
housing need.
exactly. So I was really proud to be the Senate sponsor for a bill that Representative Armando Wally has carried for several sessions. It's kind of an omnibus tenants' rights bill. And, Texas is a very landlord-friendly state. I'm a renter. I've got a landlord. I love my landlord. He's a great guy, works really hard. I've had terrible landlords. I've had
Yeah.
medium landlords. And I've seen a lot of issues in my district and other districts around me. And so some of the little things in there that would make things safer for folks. And I think it's important to note, sometimes I think people are angry. They think, well, if somebody can't get it together and pay their bills and do their part, then why should we, why should the landlord lose money? Why should we deal? One of the biggest indicators of whether poverty turns into crime is if somebody has a safe place to lay their head.
Yeah.
So making sure everyone stays in a home is actually a huge public health intervention that affects all of us. And some of these things are like right to cure. If you can come up with the money, you don't still have to get evicted. Making sure that the homes are safe and habitable, that if the landlord is not able to provide you a safe and habitable home, you could withhold rent, which that conversation doesn't go over well if you've ever had that conversation with your landlord.
Sure.
Bans on lockouts where people come back to their houses, all their stuff is inside, and they literally have changed the locks on them. Anti-retaliation protection. So this is all stuff that isn't really in place in Texas, and it makes it very difficult for people. And once you have an eviction on your record, it is extremely difficult to find housing again, and you end up with families living out of cars.
Yeah.
So very, very proud to partner with Representative Wally on that one, and then have a couple of other, getting rid of junk fees. And I'm seeing this on some of my rent right now in another apartment that we stay in Austin, but you have your lease, you sign off what you're going to be paying every month, you budget maybe down to, the last $25 that you're trying to save. And then all of a sudden there's concierge fees, there's trash fees, there's monthly pet fees, even though I paid the deposit. So we want to make sure that what people are being charged is in their contract and we're not adding on more things. And folks are able to actually budget. And then we've also got a complete package or full package on manufactured homes, which I do not hear talked about enough in
Yeah.
Texas.
I noticed that there was the package on the manufactured homes. I thought that was kind of interesting. I guess the difference between real estate and personal property, and making sure that tenants understand all that stuff. And it's manufactured homes is not something that I guess I don't know. Maybe it's not a real glitzy. It's not talked about all the time. It's not school choice. It's not universal public health care. We know it's not those things. So what's going on with the manufactured homes?
So this came to us from constituents who it is just heartbreaking. Basically, they all live in a manufactured home park, a mobile home park,
Sure.
and the park changed landlords, of course, which you have no control over as a tenant. And the landlord basically said, "Get out. We're going to use this for something else. You have to go." And there's certainly I'll be honest, there's a spiritual component. I mean, these people have lived in community with each other. They've raised each other's kids. They've taken care of each other. Most people in a manufactured home obviously don't have a ton of disposable income. That's their life savings.
Typically, yeah.
And when you're told to get out, people don't realize it takes thousands of dollars to move a manufactured home. It's much more difficult to move than a one-bedroom apartment. There's all the hookups, there's the platting. You have to find an appropriate place to park it, and they won't accept homes over a certain age. It's very discriminatory. And so people just had nowhere to go. And because it's not considered a home, it's not considered real property, it's considered personal property. Once that eviction date is passed, they can bulldoze it with all of your belongings inside of it.
Whoa.
It's terrifying. Additionally, these families are being asked to move right in the middle of a semester, which again, it takes more than that 90-day notice period in a manufactured home. It's just different than a
Sure.
one-bedroom apartment. And so their kids are having to be uprooted in the middle of a semester. And we know that produces poor outcomes for the student. And so this landlord just was not cutting them any slack at all. So we're basically advocating for several policies, some of which are more likely to get a hearing than others in the Texas
Sure.
Senate this year. But one is to give tenants the right of first refusal. So if the community can collectively come up with the money to buy that land, they should be allowed to. It's been working for them. It's a safe home for them. We don't want people getting displaced and scattered. That's bad for public health. So give them the chance to come up with that money and buy the land themselves. Stop evictions in the middle of a semester, especially for these manufactured homes. Just you have to wait till winter break or summer break so that kids can really close out their semester. This one's very simple. I'm hopeful for this one. Relating to a notice of changing personal property to real property. When you buy a manufactured home, they should tell you right then, this is the process to start making this a home rather than just, a collection of your things.
Sure.
And they should get alerted that immediately and start that process. It can be expensive and onerous, but it can be done. Not everybody knows that. And then the last bill would just go ahead by state law and recategorize all of these manufactured homes as real property, just because they are the primary residence of that person.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, like I said, that's interesting that, people don't think about manufactured homes and sort of how those communities I would have never thought about how is that different. I wouldn't have been able to guess accurately what the differences are. I think it's interesting that right of first refusal, I can appreciate that. I would wonder how that would work. Would they have to form sort of an LLC and they're all members of that, or, one person, there's sort of minutia maybe or details that they would figure out sort of along the way. But I think that's a cool idea. So there's also emergency preparedness, and I live in Austin. You're living in Austin right now currently, but not permanently. And there was a recent study about burying the power lines. And this is something that's in your Nurse First agenda, burying the power lines in Austin after Winter Storm Uri. A lot of people talked about, well, that could maybe protect us from this, massive blackout. I think the news story recently said that it was, prohibitively expensive for the city of Austin to do that. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the burying power lines? What are the pros and cons? Is that economically feasible? Is that something that a state would need to step in and help?
Basically, we want to find out.
Yeah.
We keep hearing people talk about it. Say Florida's done it, Denmark's done it, and although those may be politically different places, they're actually all coastal plains, right? It's pretty similar, low water table, all that kind of stuff. So we want to know, can we do it? And if we can't, why not? And can we do it piecemeal? Or what's the best way to go ahead and be burying infrastructure? Really excited to hear Centerpoint talking yesterday at the BNC hearing, Business and Commerce, about kind of the stuff that they're going to be doing to isolate those outages, thinking of the string of Christmas lights. Super important. So as we're messing with infrastructure and segmenting, could we be burying some of it so that it's not subject to wind and ice?
Yeah.
And it may be expensive, but it's the kind of thing that the price tag grows not just every second. The price tag on that kind of major infrastructure investment grows. And I can tell you that there's an unbelievable economic cost to having 2 weeks of power outages for a major part of the Gulf Coast region. Basically, every 3 years we've seen something huge, and it's really sad to see it. We would go knock on doors and check on people, and then I would go clock in at the emergency department, and those same people are coming begging for cool air, for medication, for supplies, and they're just lined up down the hallway, just lying in stretchers with too few nurses and too few staff to really address needs. So it was just, I have a visceral experience of these power outages, kind of working it from both sides, and you can't put a price tag on that,
Yeah.
on saving lives and of making our city more habitable.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, a citizen of, whatever, of Houston or Austin or a certain county or even the state of Texas would, you sort of expect the power to stay on in a state like Texas, for sure. And I understand. And I think that, if burying power lines works, even if it's maybe a little bit more expensive, it's something to look into. You mentioned, though, you're a nurse, and maybe during these disasters, you're spending your free time, knocking on maybe your neighbors' doors, checking on people. That's noble of you. That's great. I think it's probably pretty common among nurses. It's a pretty noble class of people, I think. And then going and clocking in and working at the hospital, and there's too few nurses. I hadn't planned on asking you about this, but I think you probably have some good ideas about it or commentary about it. Is there a nursing shortage in Texas? Is there, because I've been to the hospital for family members recently, and that seems to be the case. And I think I've read that. Is there a nursing shortage?
It depends on how you look at it exactly. I mean, the short answer is yes, we need a much bigger healthcare workforce, period. So
Mhm.
doctors, nurses, CNAs, respiratory therapists, physical therapists, I mean, every single type of lab technicians, like literally top to bottom, throughout the whole hospital and community healthcare system, we need more people.
Yeah.
There's a real difference between the haves and the have-nots. So if you're looking at, a psychiatric facility or a state supported living center that's out in a rural district, much harder to attract talent than, the Texas Medical Center, where the hospitals are competing against each other with benefits packages and pay and that sort of thing. So it yes is the short answer, but there's not. I would be careful just making like huge broad statements about everything that's
Sure.
happening. That being said, the governor convened a fantastic task force on healthcare workforce development that came out, I think, last April of last year. Fantastic recommendations. The Senate's worked really hard on specifically the nursing workforce shortage, and some of that stuff is getting more funding again this year, trying to make sure folks have access to school. They've got access to preceptor spots. People who are teaching keep practicing. People who are practicing need to be teaching. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. And I think that we're going to see some improvement for sure because of, frankly, the leadership of Texas senators in a big way, and because of what the governor is doing. So, um, yeah, I think there's a big conversation to be had around that. But exactly what the solution is, it's a lot of solutions
Yeah.
that kind of address it from every angle.
Yeah. Well, I think Houston's missing at least one nurse with you being in Austin. I assume that when you get back to Houston, you'll go back to practicing. And just, I mean, just out of curiosity to, we'll segue back into the nurse first agenda. I mean, is it to being a senator and a registered nurse? That's got to be a difficult balancing act. Nurses,
I would say
don't you guys have like 12 hours on, 12 hours off type deals?
totally. I was actually quite prepared for long hearings coming into the Texas Senate. And people always ask, how do you balance it? That's usually how they ask it. And I say, what balance? But it really is actually cool because, I'm working as an ER nurse. I'm starting the IV. Someone comes and they can't breathe. I'm giving them steroids, albuterol, and
Sure.
they feel better right then. But I leave the room and my heart is heavy because I know that they're sick because their home's full of mold and they can't get it remediated.
Yeah.
And so that kind of burns you out to just keep fixing these small problems and putting band-aids on and never really addressing the root causes of some of these issues. And then I get the chance to come to the Texas Senate and work on those root cause issues, but it can take 20 years to pass really good policy. So they kind of actually feed each other. It's very satisfying to be in that intimate one-on-one bedside space with someone. And then it's very exciting and it's a huge honor to get to go upstream and work on the actual causes of their issues. And I just feel like I'm gonna live forever and be happy to do both because they feed each other so well.
Sure. Yeah. And you're sort of empowering yourself to be a better nurse. And, in that you're also empowering other nurses and healthcare practitioners as well.
Yeah.
But speaking of breathing, part of your nurse first agenda, there's a couple things: criminal justice reform and vaping, e-cigarettes. I don't know, certainly not proud to say that I'm a former vapor. I'm proud that I'm former, not proud that I was. Does that make sense? So I think I can feel for the kids nowadays and how easy it is to get hooked on that stuff. What's the overarching goal of the bills for the your vaping bills?
And let me just start by saying, very proud of you for being former. I'm 33. I've dabbled I've dabbled in vaping devices as well.
Yeah,
And it's tough to kick. It really is. So we've got a suite of 5 bills that were directly from our constituents. So a smoke shop went in right next to Wharton Elementary School in Montrose. And I wish I could show you a picture right now. It's wild. There's the kids' playground. There's fence with the cutest, most beautiful mural, and then you can see the umbrellas and smoke wafting over the smoking patio. I mean, it's shocking.
geez.
And all the kids were saying, "Oh, can we go in that store? It looks fun after
Yeah,
school." And of course, the answer is no. And so we're just really frustrated that you can look at a map. There's smoke shops next to every single elementary school in almost the state. They've popped up. And so this suite of packages is basically bringing them up to par with alcohol. No advertising close to schools and churches, no shops next to schools and churches, allow localities to regulate it, no minors allowed in the shop, which I actually think is so important because these employees can get busted right now for selling a vape to a minor. So why are these retailers not doing right by their employees and requiring an ID at the door to make sure that you don't end up accidentally selling to a minor? So
Yeah.
that's really important. And I'm very excited to say 3 of these bills moved out of state affairs yesterday. So 2 of them are going to probably go to local and a contested, one will go to the floor, and we'll talk about that. But we'll at least get to start kind of putting a dent in this issue of having all these smoke shops and vape shops right where kids are going to be asking for them.
Yeah, when I was reading through them, I know you said that it sort of brings it up to the same par as alcohol. I was thinking it sort of brings it up to the same par as cigarettes, but maybe
Right.
cigarettes are more. I don't know. Just out of curiosity, what would happen if the bill gets passed to, you can't build one like in that example that you gave in Houston. Terrible. I hope that business moves. That's awful. You can't expect a school to move. But what happens if this gets passed? Do those businesses get grandfathered in? Do they have a certain amount of time they have to move? Is there
Great question.
that?
And I think it's important to note, so this has a ton of bipartisan support. We've got Republicans signed on to our bills. We've got Republican sponsors in the House for it. We're also seeing bills from other legislators. It's not just a Houston problem. It's all over the state. It's in
Oh,
every
yeah.
district.
I can think of several next to Austin elementary schools. Yes.
Exactly. And so some of the bills are crafted differently. And so I just say that to say for the public, just what I say here about my bills doesn't necessarily apply to some of the other ones. Some of the other ones are retroactive. Ours are not retroactive, and the parents understand that they're kind of planting a seed of a tree that someone else will sit under. And we hope that, the passage of these laws will also motivate these business owners to move. There are some laws being proposed that would capture not just a smoke shop, that would capture basically any retailer that's selling any kind of cigarette or vaping device. Some of these do apply retroactively. Some have different levels of criminal penalties. Any bill that I'm signed on to places the responsibility or the penalty on the retailer, the operator, not on some kid working behind the counter, not on some kid coming in trying to buy a vape. We want to make sure we're targeting the right folks with these laws. But basically, these smoke shops should be aware there's a lot of energy, and there's varying degrees of that energy
Yeah.
coming to try to correct this issue.
Yeah, for sure. The I want to, I mean, I guess because vape shops typically also retail other things. There's SB3, the THC ban, which, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is really pushing hard, and a lot of others are pushing hard as well. I'm not sure. I don't recall seeing anything in the Nurse First agenda. So if you don't have an opinion on that, that's totally fine. But as we were talking, I was thinking to myself, well, I mean, there seems to be some, I don't know, some congruency there, right? That they sell these products to, right next to an elementary school. That could also be a problem.
Totally. And I think what's exciting about it is that all these kind of concepts do attack the same problem from a different angle. And
Sure.
so whatever passes, it's all going to be an improvement
Yeah.
as far as keeping kids away from from these chemicals that either aren't regulated, we don't know what they are, or they're in vapes, and we know that vaping itself is pretty harmful.
Yeah. Well, speaking of kids and them getting in trouble, there's SB 1306, criminal justice reform as a part of your Nurse First agenda. And I think if I understand correctly, it sort of changes the age of criminal responsibility. What's the standard that you're proposing, and why is this important?
So right now in Texas, the criminal age of responsibility is 17, and we want to raise it to 18 to be on par with most of the other laws that, govern whether or not you're an adult. And I just want to put this into context for folks. We are one of very few states, if I can't name exactly how many off the top of my head. The conversations in other states around how to treat children in the juvenile system, how to treat young people in the adult system is just vastly different. We are in, I think it's quite backward. I just got to say it, that we are treating 17-year-olds as adults, and we're housing them with adults. We're trying them as adults when we know that actually neurodevelopmentally, there's a big shift around age 25.
Yeah.
That's when your car insurance goes down. That's when you can rent a car, because we know people make very different decisions. If you can keep a gun out of a kid's hand until they're 25, they are so much less likely to harm someone or harm themselves. And so what we're doing by kind of bringing kids in, treating them like adults, is not neurodevelopmentally responsible, and it really sets kids up for failure. And it doesn't make sense with what I'm hearing from my colleagues who care deeply. We're talking about kids in foster care. We're talking about kids in the system. Everybody wants a kid to be able to have a good outcome and to be able to grow into an adult who works hard, who loves their family, who pays their taxes, who is a contributing member of society. And what we're doing by not raising the age, by continuing to say 17-year-olds are adults and we're going to try them as that, basically guarantees a bad outcome. It just guarantees that these kids are not going to be able to, reach adulthood and level out and stable out, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in my own personal life, there was a big difference between when I was 18 and when I was 25. Huge difference. And, it probably wasn't until I was maybe 30 that things really, turned around for me. Started making good decisions.
Right. And, people got to be held accountable for actions, things like that.
Sure.
But there's a lot of growth in grace. And really, we want to be scientifically sound as we work to prevent crimes, solve crimes, and end crime. Treating 17-year-olds as though they're the same as a 35-year-old is just not sound science.
Sure. Well, Senator Molly Cook, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to mention? We covered a lot.
I know we really did cover a lot. No, we got to a lot of it. I just invite folks, follow us on social media. Everybody should be tuning in to the Texas Senate. We get a lot fewer public comments than the House does, over kind of on trend. And then, folks can come and watch in the gallery. They can tune in online. You can hear every single word that we're saying to each other on the floor and learn a lot about issues. So I just invite folks, get up here, come watch, tune in online, and follow us on social media and be involved.
Yeah. I wonder why is it that the House gets more attention than the instead of the Senate, the House or the representative. Why is that? Why is there that difference? I wonder.
I could probably do a whole nother episode on I've got thoughts on that, but whatever. It's still your capital. So whatever the forces are, get in here, make your voice heard, come watch.
Well, what is y'all's social media handle and website?
At Molly for Texas, all spelled out.
Okay, great. We'll put the links down in the description below. Senator Molly Cook, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.